Chapter 21 takes a look at America's place within the global conflict known as World War I, or the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. It has a lot of different names in historical circles. But for the sake of this video and for the sake of this course, I want to focus on specifically President Woodrow Wilson's role in shaping or not shaping what he called the lasting peace of the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations, the international peacekeeping organization that he sort of created and then failed to get the United States into. So, anyways, let's talk a little bit about Woodrow Wilson's personality, because I think this is important to understanding how he viewed America's role in the conflict and how he viewed America's role in the world. Woodrow Wilson was the son of a minister. He practiced preaching as a young boy in front of empty church pews and always saw himself as destined for this great sort of moral leadership in which he would shape public opinion and then save the people of the country, almost very much a messianic complex in which he was going to show the world, show Americans the error of their ways, and then bring them to his correct teachings, educate them, and then him being able to save the world, essentially, is what he saw in himself. He was an intellectual. He was an academic. He went to the University of Virginia for law school. He became a political scientist professor and later a president of Princeton University in the Ivy League before he got into politics when he became the governor of New Jersey and then the Democratic nominee for the presidency in 1912 and was able to secure the presidency. Only the second Democratic candidate to secure the presidency since the Civil War, other than Grover Cleveland. So there's a little bit about Woodrow Wilson and then a little bit more about his personality. No one got close to him. He was very guarded. And upon winning the presidency in 1912, he called all the men that had helped him win that victory together, and he met in a room, and he sat there and he told them, "Gentlemen, I want you to understand that I owe none of you anything." And again, remember, this is a time in which you have political corruption, patronage, the spoil system, where it's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. He says, "Gentlemen, I owe you nothing. God ordained that I be president." And that is the way that he looked at his victory. It wasn't some sort of, it was destiny is the way that he saw it from a very young age. And that is the way that he was president of the United States. When the United States was brought into the war as a result of a myriad of issues, the sinking of the Lusitania, as well as several other ships, including the Sussex, by German U-boats, but also the sending of the Zimmermann telegraph by the Germans. Woodrow Wilson was drawn into the conflict as a matter of honor, that the United States could not stand idly by and be dishonored by Germany anymore in this conflict. And of course, the U.S. had always been partial to the Allies, the British and the French side of the conflict. And so it was just natural that when the Germans had done too much to avoid bringing the United States into the war, that Wilson would join the war on the side of the Allies. There are a lot of contradictions here about Wilson's actions prior to the United States joining the war. One of the main ones being his disavowal of unrestricted submarine warfare, while also not standing up to the British naval blockade, which was starving the German people. Secondly, his willingness to place American citizens on boats like the Lusitania and the Sussex, that the Germans had said, "We're going to sink any ship that comes into our waters that we feel is carrying anything that's helping the Allies," and then not apologize for the fact that these people were put into harm's way because of his unwillingness to change that policy. It led to his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, quitting because of the hypocrisy of Wilson's actions and his inability to listen to anyone else, because he was, he was the savior of the world. His interference in Central and Latin American nations, his re-indoctrination of the Monroe Doctrine, asserting American hegemony over this part of the world, the Western Hemisphere, was a a combination of American exceptionalism and also racism, that non-white nations need to be shown how to behave, was one of his favorite quotes. And the United States would show them how to behave before they could really be free to elect their own governments, and experience self-determination that he was always preaching about. Um, so the United States enters into a war that's almost over in 1917. Um, and really, America's big place in this is the peace, right? The leaders of all sides of the war meet after they agreed to an armistice on 11/11/11 in 1918. And Wilson really upsets the British and the French specifically when he arrives there, as he arrives being the leader of the United States that was only in the war for a matter of months as opposed to 4 years. There are 8 million dead at the end of this war. United States casualties number approximately 50,000. Now, 50,000 is a lot. It's not 8 million. The brunt of the casualties were shouldered by those nations who had been involved in the conflict since its inception: Britain, France, Italy, Russia later on, before they pulled out of the war as a result of the communist uprising in 1917 under Lenin and the Bolsheviks. And then also the losing side, quote unquote, Germany. But Wilson comes in and he starts dictating how the peace will look and what should be in the treaty. And he comes up with what becomes known as the 14 points. And the 14 points are very Wilsonian in nature. Here are 14 things that if everybody in the world will do this, if you'll just listen to me, we'll never have another war. Okay? Very Wilsonian, and I know what's right. And if you just do what I say, you can thank me later, right? One of the parts of this was the creation of an international peacekeeping organization that would mediate disputes between warring nations and hopefully avoid armed conflict. And this was the failed League of Nations, which is the precursor to the United Nations today. But Wilson goes over there. The treaty gets ratified. He brings it back to the United States, and he needs the Senate to approve it with a 2/3 ratifying vote. The interesting thing about this is the first United States Senate that was elected by popular vote by the citizens, right? So these are senators who are, instead of just answering to state leaders about whether they'll be given another 6-year term, they're now consumed with democracy, right? How should I vote on this treaty? Because is it going to help me get reelected or not, right? Which again is a whole other topic for another sort of podcast. But essentially, Wilson will never get the votes that he needs because the Republicans had taken majorities in the House and in the Senate. And a group of senators led by Henry Cabot Lodge, one of Teddy Roosevelt's proteges and disciples and friends, leads a group that is going to say, we will not approve this treaty because joining the League of Nations takes away Congress's power to declare war. And they will successfully argue this in the public, and the Treaty of Versailles will never be ratified by the United States. Now, it will be ratified by those other nations, but the United States never formally ratifies that treaty, never joining the League of Nations, thus one reason why it did fail, right? I think there's two other things I want to talk about here, and that is, number one, the way that Germany was treated at the Treaty of Versailles, and that was they were treated unfairly. Yes, they were the quote unquote losers, but they were never invaded. Their capital of Berlin was never taken. And the government that negotiated the treaty was not the elected or the monarchical government of Germany. The Kaiser, their king, had fled the country, and a group of anti-war Germans, the Weimars, seized power and then agreed to this treaty, blaming them for the war, forcing them to pay war reparations, demilitarizing the nation, and taking away a ton of their land. And so the first part of this is that essentially everybody that looked at this treaty, from Herbert Hoover to international law experts, said, when you have a war like this that is so damaging to everybody involved, and you don't really have a loser, you just basically have a let's stop fighting because this is pointless, and you shoulder all this blame onto this one side, all you're doing is setting the stage for a conflict that is very, very close from happening after this war ends. Sure enough, World War II is essentially 2 decades later. So it's not like, wow, I can't believe this happened. There were plenty of people saying, this treaty is flawed. You're not treating Germany correctly. Okay. Um, Second part of that is that redrawing of the borders of Europe. And this is something that even comes up, in the world, today, all the time. Whether this video is being watched in 2025 or this video is being watched in 2035, it's going to apply. When you arbitrarily redraw the borders of nations, you include and you exclude uh, ethnic groups that feel that they should be a part of said nation or they should not be a part of said nation, right? And when you don't consult these people, you're going to lead to future conflict. We see it all the time in the Middle East, in what used to be Mesopotamia, the Ottoman Empire. Um, you see it in Asia. You see it all over the place. You must consult the ethnic people that are having their borders redrawn. And this is a major mistake of the King Crane Commission, that was the consulting American body that redrew the borders, that failed to give autonomy to certain other nations and certain other ethnic groups. And this is a problem of history, right? The second thing being the Spanish flu epidemic that broke out after World War One. And so we see parallels here between the Spanish flu to something that we all lived through, which was the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay. So again, you saw when COVID-19 pandemic began, it was being called and it was being blamed by certain ethnic or certain nations. That was unfair. The Spanish flu did not originate in Spain, yet because it was blamed by certain Americans on Spanish soldiers or Spain's nation, it gets that name, right? But again, we see that history can repeat itself when you look at this massive outbreak of a disease that we don't have an imminent cure for, and a government or a world that is unprepared to deal with this. And what you'll see in that in the chapter when it discusses this is you'll see a lot of similarities between how the COVID-19 pandemic was dealt with or was not dealt with, and then also how the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, 1919 certainly parallel and mirror that.